So this is Victoria Nuland. Most of you know who she is. She's been part and parcel of the U.S. neocon empire for a while now. But her main thing, one of the things she's most known for, is she's really a bit of the architect and the escort for Ukraine into proxy war. She's the middleman that was like, right this way into proxy war. And she helped. She was there on the ground during the Maidan, the U.S. and Nazi-backed Maidan coup. And she was there helping that happen. And anyway, there's so many things on her resume of what a bloodthirsty maniac she is. But here she is in an interview just the other day. And she apparently admits we're now at the point, after 2.5 years, that they are now admitting that the U.S. and Britain stopped the peace process with Russia. As most of you also know, there was a peace deal on the table ready to be signed in after 1 month, less than a month into this war in Ukraine, sitting there on the table, ready to be signed, and they were close to signing it, and Ukraine was ready to sign it, and Russia was ready to sign it, and then Boris Johnson, as a representative, a vassal state of the United States, goes running to Ukraine to make sure that that peace plan is not signed, and he succeeded. And here is Victoria Nuland admitting that. Here she is.
There was a story first told by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that both sides were really close to the end, to the successful end of the negotiations, and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson interfered and stopped prevented Ukrainians from signing the deal.
And I know he's a little hard to hear, but not only has Naftali Bennett, former president of Israel, but also Boris Johnson has essentially said this in different ways. And the former head of Germany, former prime minister of Germany, has also said that this is what went down. Now, they give different reasons as to why it went down, but they have all said this in some way. So it's becoming undeniable. Anyway.
And then Ukrainian Representative Arahami kind of confirmed it. That yes, he said in an interview that there was some kind of advice from Boris Johnson to stop negotiating and to win this war militarily. Where is the myth? Where is the truth?
Relatively late in the game, the Ukrainians began asking for advice on where this thing was going. And it became clear to us, clear to the Brits, clear to others, that Putin's main condition was buried in an annex to this document that they were working on. Mm-hmm. And it included limits on the precise kinds of weapon systems that Ukraine could have, after the deal, such that Ukraine would basically be neutered as a military force. And there were no similar constraints on Russia. Russia wasn't required to pull back. Russia wasn't required to have a buffer zone from the Ukrainian border, wasn't required to have the same constraints on its military facing Ukraine. And so people inside Ukraine and people outside Ukraine started asking questions about whether this was a good deal. And it was at that point that it fell apart.
Okay, so she says it fell apart, but she admits that the U.S. and Britain went in and had a say in whether this peace deal continued. But here's a key point that Aaron Mate put forward. Victoria Nuland admits that the U.S. UK encouraged Ukraine to abandon the peace deal it negotiated with Russia in April 2022. The stated reason she gives has nothing to do with the alleged Russian atrocities in Bucha, which proxy warriors have insisted is why Ukraine walked away. Other people have said, oh no, Ukraine walked away from the peace deal because of these war crimes by Russia. But here is Victoria Nuland, the head of the proxy war committee in the United States, saying it wasn't because of that. It wasn't because of so-called Russian atrocities. Instead, Nuland says that the deal would have put limits on the precise kinds of weapons in Ukraine. So Nuland and the Biden administration, according to Aaron Mate, were willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians so that Ukraine wouldn't be, quote unquote, neutered as a U.S. client state while it's bleeding Russia, right? The goal of this thing, one, was to bleed Russia, use their armaments, use up their military-aged people, use up money, to bleed Russia in a variety of ways. Another was to put sanctions on Russia such that it would destroy them economically, which has not succeeded. Another was to separate them from Europe, which has succeeded, to put a dividing line between them and all the rest of Europe. One last thing from Aaron Mate. He says the U.S. sabotage of the April 2022 peace deal has been effectively censored by U.S. media, including progressives. Perhaps this admission from one of the key saboteurs will break their oath of collective silence. Of course, it won't actually break their oath of collective silence. The mainstream media, the remarkable cowards that is our mainstream media, I mean, cowards and shills, both. They are both, it's both cowardice and they are getting paid a lot of money in order to say the things they say. But they have just completely ignored the reality is that this could have all ended 1 month into it, less than a month into it. That this all could have been over, that hundreds of thousands of people would still be alive, that millions of Ukrainians would not be refugees right now. All of that doesn't matter to the bloodthirsty U.S. imperial state. And this is a massive admission, but of course it will get almost no coverage. It is a massive admission, but of course it will not be talked about by our government, by our media, by mainstream media at all, by the political candidates, and unless you talk about third parties. I could see someone like Jill Stein or Claudia de la Cruz or Cornel West mentioning this, but outside of that, probably not. You have the one of the main faces of this proxy war in Ukraine saying that a peace deal was on the table and that the U.S. and Britain stopped it because it wouldn't allow Ukraine to bomb and assault Russia enough. But of course, they never wanted any peace deal. They never wanted this proxy war to end. It was all about keeping it going.